far from my mind.
I think that this might be one of the single best representations of dragons that I've read in the fantasy genre.
This book is a dark, fascinating, disgusting, wonderful, nauseating, intriguing, effed up, heartfelt, brutal character study
that recaptures the magic of far-flung galaxies, grand ideas, and more.
There's so much this book gets right. Like any good map, you're aware of the destination it's leading you towards, but the way it takes you there is very pretty indeed.
An all-consuming dreamscape, the likes of Poe and Morpheus.
It's to me a rich and futuristic fest. Menaces guns that burst hard.
Okay, good morning, everyone. How are we all doing today?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Really, thank you for having the opportunity to bring us on and talk about everything. So, yeah, thank you. Hope you're doing well.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm Emily Hughes. I'm going to be your moderator today. I am the author of the book Horror for Weenies, Everything You Need to Know About the Films You're Too Scared to Watch. I am also just a big old nerd for space horror, so I'm really excited to be here and be hosting this panel. Wanted to say thank you to the folks at TBRCon, to the folks at FanFiAddict for having us all, for organizing this wonderful little pick-me-up in the deep, dark days of January. I think we all needed this. And I am going to ask all of our panelists here to introduce themselves. We did have a couple last-minute switch-ups in the roster here. Unfortunately, Aliette cannot join us today because of a personal matter, but we have 2 more additions. So I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their work. Let's start with Ness Brown.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ness Brown. I like to say that I am an author by day, astrophysicist by night. I am currently studying astrophysics at the University of Colorado Boulder. And when I'm not tearing my hair out about research, I am scribbling down as many ideas as I can. So I am really excited to be on the panel today because I feel that my expertise is something I love to bring into my art. And space horror is absolutely a passion of mine. So I look forward to chatting about it and hearing everything from the other incredible authors that are here in the panel today.
All right. And let's go over to Stacy S.A. Barnes next.
Hi, I'm Stacy, and I write space horror. Obviously, I'm on a panel about space horror. I hope I'm in the right place. I wrote Dead Silence, Ghost Station, and the forthcoming Cold Eternity, which I'm really excited about. I gotta say it's hard to follow Ness because I have absolutely no expertise. I just make stuff up, and hopefully don't get called out too much for it. I love space horror. Some of the questions that we're going to be talking about, Emily, I had to think about because it's just always been part of my life. My dad, who's a big sci-fi person, is flabbergasted that my sister and I, where did the horror come from? He's astonished and kind of grossed out because we both love horror. I'm like, we don't know. He says he read Twilight Zone to us too many times. So I don't know if that's true. During the day, I am a high school library staff person. So I work with teenagers a lot, which is a lot of fun and also just incredibly interesting. And that's me.
All right. And Chris Hooley. Let's start with Chris Hooley.
Yeah, I'm Chris Hooley. I wrote The Inevitable. I knew I was going to mess that up. The Inevitable. Why can't I speak now? Halo, help me. I wrote The Inevitability of Evil with Halo Scot and Ross Young. And that is about space horror as you can get. What's more terrifying than infinite space? That's the question that I ask myself every day. And it terrifies me every single day. And every time I think about that answer. So I'm excited to chat to everybody today about horror and all good things. Let's dig deep into our fears. One of my biggest fears is E.T., which ties in nicely with space horror.
You and me both, honestly. And on to our next Chris.
Yeah, hello. Again, thank you so much for having us here. It's brilliant. And horror for me has been an absolute, go-to for me with every kind of sense. TV shows, movies, books. I absolutely adore horror. But my real passion has always been throwing it back to space horror. I grew up, my parents downstairs, and I'm listening through the wall at the Aliens movie, which has become one of my absolute ultimate favorite franchises. And that movie in particular, I adore. So I've written in the horror genre, and I had started a space horror, but kind of backed out with confidence a little bit for that. But it is something that I really want to tap into. And, things like Event Horizon, which I think is massively underrated. Space horror for me is it's just brilliant, and I absolutely adore it. So hoping to learn a bit here as well as chat about it. So yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, Halo Scot.
Hey everyone, I'm Halo. I've written, I'm going to try to say this right, The Inevitability of Evil with Chris Woolley. I write really dark books. One of the space horrors I've written is also The Mortality Experiment. I've loved space horror probably since I watched The Borg in Star Trek Voyager. And I know they're not kind of the typical space monster, but I was terrified by them. And like to this day, honestly. So yeah, big sci-fi fan, big horror fan, big kind of anything macabre and horrific fan.
I think that's true of all of us here, and that's a beautiful thing. It's nice to be with like-minded people. So I like a panel that's, free-flowing and conversational, so please feel free to, I'm going to toss out some questions, but please feel free to respond to each other and jump in and, build off each other's answers. I always think that's more interesting for the audience than just a strict Q&A. So for my first, bomb to drop into the conversation, I figured we could start off with an easy one, which is, what was your formative space horror moment? What was the kind of thing that clicked the light bulb on in your brain and made you go, oh, I love this? I'm not going to call on anyone to start. If you feel moved to speak, go ahead.
I think this is the question I was trying to think about, because like a lot of science fiction, it's just, I don't have a clear memory of ever watching Alien or Aliens for the first time. It's just always been there. And I'm sure all of us, that's probably a pretty formative experience for, I think, a lot of space horror writers. But for me, what I liked in particular is the idea of Ripley in space, that character. And because when you grow up, as I did in the late 70s, 80s, you're dealing with Princess Leia and Wonder Woman, who are fantastic. But a lot of your sci-fi had women in a secondary role at best. I mean, so I really liked that, Ripley was the one telling them, hey, especially in the second movie, you're screwing this up. Listen to me. I am an authority. Oh, Ness, that is so cute.
Sorry to be disruptive.
No cat is ever disruptive.
Never. So that's mine.
Yeah, I can completely agree with that. I mean, I never really realized it until recently. I've been writing stories, a zombie story I've written and published, and my latest novella is about, a big 11 authors stuck in a German castle, 16th century castle, and it all goes wrong terribly. And I've never noticed until recently, my main protagonists are always female strong leads. And I kind of sat there and thought about it for a while, and I definitely narrowed it down to Ripley. Growing up with that sort of main character, I never, having not really experienced that genre very well, as I was so young, I never really considered it to be anything other than just an amazing main character. And you got Vasquez in there as well, who's one of the best badasses in there. And it just really, I think that's been my inspiration growing up, with my mother and my sisters, and then watching that. I think it's always been something that's there for me. So when I started writing naturally, that character, sort of main character, was always going to be, for some reason, a female lead. And I'm sure it's going back to Ripley to inspire that.
Yeah, I think for me, speaking about kind of strong female characters in horror, Seven of Nine, and it's not like kind of traditionally horror, but that, going back to the Borg, being assimilated in this hive mind where you lose all of your free will, and then where you kind of almost, there's a Stockholm syndrome, right? Where you want to keep on staying in the hive mind. I think that was really when I saw like what horror could be that could have that psychological aspect too, and that kind of emotional connection to a character where you're like, in the beginning, are they good? Are they bad? Are they morally gray? So I think that's really where I started trying to dive deeper into stuff and like Doctor Who and the silence and everything that they do so well in that series.
I think just to say, I think you're right. Even though Star Trek isn't horror in that same way, I just wanted to say I watched Next Generation, like lived on that, and I think there are a lot of elements in there that are horror adjacent that have been an influence. So it's interesting that they didn't delve into it in the same way, but a lot of like losing your identity or losing yourself into a collective. I mean, there's some really scary stuff in there, even though it's not specifically horror.
Yeah, exactly. And like for aliens, I think I was exposed first through Star Trek, but then I don't know if the ride's still there, but I went to Disney as a kid and they had the alien ride where they had the aliens jump out at you on the ride. And so I think kind of in a different sense, I was exposed to more of the jump scare horror and the kind of creature horror. So I think that all kind of came together and I was like, oh, it's so cool that story can be this, that story can terrify and make you think.
Well, I think it's so interesting that we all kind of went directly to the Ripley place because, you hear sometimes that after the X-Files premiered, they call it the Scully effect of young women going into STEM fields. I wonder if there was kind of a Ripley effect for space horror writers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. This kind of also leads to the inherent question of why is space so terrifying? And I think there are the obvious answers. It's a vast void that doesn't care if you live or die and is inherently hostile to human life. But what draws all of you to set stories in space specifically?
I think if I'm going to go there again, it's all going back to say Aliens and even modern films like Life, where they are stuck on a ship that's, you cannot escape the outside, or if you can, there's a lot of danger to it. So I think in its natural element, it's very dangerous. But also when you throw in there, so many things that can go wrong, it just takes you to a place that's all kind of new and nice to experience, where anything that might be set on Earth, for example, you kind of know details about it. Do you know what I mean? Whereas any kind of space horror, there's so many things that you can just pick up as new and exciting and dangerous. I think it just plays so well into that genre where anything can happen at any moment and you're never safe anyway. So it naturally puts you on edge from the beginning. And going back to say Alien 1, the tension in that was what really drew me into the love of space horror. Absolute tension was terrifying. So having that kind of natural layer in all the space horror for me is just perfect.
I think for me, it's the sort of natural question that we're either alone in the universe, which is terrifying as a thought and a prospect that we are the only things that are conscious in this entire thing that we only just started to discover, or we're not. And if we're not, that's equally as terrifying, but for very different reasons. And I think when you're writing, obviously the best writers and the best stories have really great questions embedded at the start of the story. And like how great is that question for writing? Are we alone? And if we're not, what are the consequences? And that answering those questions gives you the perfect platform for space horror. And all the examples obviously that you've mentioned utilize that idea of are we alone, and if we're not, what are the consequences really, really well. And that's what's so intriguing by stepping into that field for me as a writer.
I think sort of a bit adjacent to both Chris's answers. For me, what I think is really cool about this setting is that I think in a pure sci-fi sense, pure sci-fi is maybe an investigation of humankind's potential and what we can achieve. But when you add in the horror element, space horror, I think it becomes a lot more about all of the failure points that is kind of built into all of our achievements. And I think it's very cool that space horror can kind of start a conversation where it's like, in spite of all of our greatness or in spite of all of our potential as a species, does it measure up against the void? And I think it's very the tension comes from the fact that most of the time the answer is no. So I personally really like exploring that element.
I think that's such a great way of saying that, because in my head I was thinking what I like about it is the combination of hope and achievement. We're doing these amazing things, look, we're out there in space, and usually it's almost a norm. Like, it's not like we're, taking off for the first time or visiting Mars for the first time or whatever. It's like, it's kind of like, oh, we're out here, we're doing this stuff. That's great. And then something terribly goes wrong. But the thing that I like about it is we're still human and we're still bringing all our flaws with us. So the argument that I make about this is, and hopefully this isn't a spoiler for a 40-something-year-old movie, but in Aliens, I would argue that Aliens, meaning the second installment, the bad guy, the villain, the antagonist, is not actually the aliens, right? It's Paul Reiser's character. So to me, it's we're still screwing up the same way we were on Earth, but now it's so much more dangerous because you can't just run away from the serial killer. You can't just run away from the bad guy or call for help. Like, you're on your own. So I feel like it amps up those stakes, even while we're bringing in some of the same humanity flaws that we've been dealing with since forever.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about what you were saying. It's almost the monstrosity in humanity. And I think that, for me, I love seeing, whereas it's like space horror where, I mean, like, I'm a huge Battlestar Galactica fan, and that series is all about how, are the humans really the monsters? Are the robots the monsters? If you can't tell the difference anymore, like who should take the fall for things, and how they're, again, I don't want to give a spoiler, but it has been out for a while. But they're trapped in space. Their planet is, gone, and that kind of inherent, reliance on each other, and like Ness was saying, your shortcomings when you can't. You can't rely on each other. You can't trust each other. I think that's really interesting to explore as a writer.
Yeah, in terms of those that, for me, what I really love in a horror story is when there are different sort of levels of threat layered on top of each other. There are multiple antagonists or potential, dangers. And not to, pick on Ness specifically, but with The Scourge Between Stars, what I really love is that there's the very top level kind of existential cosmic horror threat. There is the, immediate, okay, there are monsters on this ship and we have to do something about that. And then there are, not the lowest level, but maybe the most sort of low stakes level, the interpersonal conflicts in the interpersonal conflicts. You must tell us what this beautiful creature's name is.
This is Mephistopheles, Mephi for short, so slightly appropriate, maybe.
That's perfect.
Excuse me.
So there's this kind of inherent additive quality to setting a horror story in space. What are the limitations that you've found? What are the drawbacks of setting a horror story in space?
I think in my opinion, I think oftentimes the setting of a story, many authors use it as its own character. But space, in my view at least, is inherently neutral in a way that most of the settings, terrestrial aside, are not. Like we have all of these characterizations of like the sea, for example, that I don't think are translatable to the void necessarily. So I think it could be a drawback depending on what you're trying to do. If your setting is this sort of uncaring, nothingness or infinity, I think that can sometimes be hard to wield depending on what role you want space to play in the story. But that can also be the advantage as well.
I think one of the things that with the story I was trying to create, and this kind of sat there in the back burner, was one of the things that made me back out from that story initially, and that's why I've left it, is getting kind of the technology right without being too far-fetched, or people in the know of space, not space technology, but in the know of technology can say, oh, that wouldn't happen, or that can't happen. So it's getting those details right. It's something, I think going back to Alien again, it's always going to be referenced, but the basic computers and the noises they made were so sort of amazing for the story, and the way they looked in the visuals, I think is so good, and that was so basic. But when you're writing a modern space horror, at what point do you get things right or wrong? So that's kind of my difficulty in the space horror at the moment.
I
definitely
also
think
like. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
um, writers and politeness is always
No, it's this.
all I was going to say is I agree the technology thing is something I struggle with, but because I am so woefully I'm going to say ignorant. Yeah, woefully ignorant of the actual true technology behind it. I'm kind of relying on, I think in science fiction particularly, we've all just sort of agreed there are things that can happen. You know, we do have faster than light travel, whether you call it warp drive or you call it FTL. So, you know, kind of working off of things like that and making it seem realistic. And in my opinion, it doesn't ever work perfectly. Like it's always, you know, Empire Strikes Back where something is breaking and something is not working. And I feel like that aspect of the technology is the thing that I try to incorporate, because I feel like you have trouble with this willing suspension of disbelief when it's like everything runs smoothly and whatever. But no, when the whatever lever is broken and we can't do this because of that, and then it's like, okay, yeah, now I get this. In terms of the limitation of space, I think it's more that you know, I feel in my case, I just don't know enough. Like, I'm sure there are other stories and things that, for example, that Ness knows about that would make amazing stories, but I just don't know enough about that. And so my workaround, for lack of a better term, is to focus mostly on the people drama versus the technology or the specifics of a black hole or whatever, because I don't know those things.
I think that's a really good point. And like, because I mean, space is isolating, at least in how we interact with the void, right? Because we're not kind of creatures of the void. Not being guaranteed water, not being guaranteed food, air, and everything that kind of on Earth we take for granted, depending, I should say, on the location where you live. I think that makes it brings ideas, you know, because you're like, how are you going to kind of provide them? It also can always make like those challenges, right? Like all of a sudden you have an air leak, or like, you know, the water is contaminated. But it also, I think it just makes it's like a locked room mystery almost in a way once you're setting something in space. So it's always, to me, I think focusing on the, what do you have? What do you take for granted? You know, like when your power goes off, and it might just be off for 24 hours, you realize how much you rely on power. And I think space is kind of doing that on a larger scale when you set a story there.
I think one of the complications when you're writing a story in space is to try and get that that sort of feeling right, sort of that like Lovecraftian idea that this thing is terrifying, so terrifying it's almost impossible to describe. But obviously, as a writer, you're trying to put that on the page, and that can be hard to capture. But like what you said there, I think it's going back to those human elements. So like, we're not going to find description like scary inherently, but what we do find scary is the things that we can associate with, even though we can't necessarily picture what it would be like to be in space. What we can do is, like Halo's just said, what we can imagine something vital in our existence suddenly being at risk, and that I found that the hardest thing when we were putting together. I'm not going to try and say it again. The inevitability of evil. Yes, there we go. I got it right. But when we were putting that together, is how do we capture that essence of fear, essentially? So space is a setting, and we are using it as a vehicle to sort of heighten that fear. But how do we boil it down to something that people are going to inherently understand and recognize? And I think that can be some of the challenges when you write about space.
Yeah, you guys are anticipating all my questions. This is great. I do want to come back to that question of, you know, how do you conceive of something that, you know, we have no earthly like point of reference for. But before that, I want to go back to the tech question. You know, technological advances are, you know, imagining technological advances kind of an inherent part of sci-fi, an inherent part of setting stories in a setting that's so unfamiliar. How do you handle that? How do you, I mean, Stacey, you talked about, you know, just kind of making it up, which is great. I mean, that's why it's fiction, right? But I would be very interested to hear everybody's approaches to that issue.
Just speaking for myself in terms of making it up, which I was sort of being blithe there, but I do try to think about where we are and then where we're going, and looking at it from the standpoint of civilization, and how we can make money, because I feel like that's what drives, unfortunately, a lot of technological advances, or at least the spread of certain technology is about how can this make us money. And so I always think back into the Disney 1950s, and they were all future world, flying cars and the Jetsons and all that. And we didn't go that way, but they also didn't picture until maybe Star Trek, the original series, us having the ability to communicate with, handheld devices that we took with us everywhere, but they didn't have many computers. So I always kind of figure when I'm looking at technology, I want it to be logical based on where we are and where I've set this. Mine are not set too far in the distant future. I usually around 100 or 200 years. So I kind of look at, the exponential growth of technology, but also what would make sense. Like, sure, we could do something that would be amazing and fantastic, but can it be scaled for larger humanities usage versus a science experiment? And who would be willing to invest in that, and how much money is it going to make them? Because I feel like that's where technology goes, at least in our current incarnation. So I do make it up, but I try to base it on where we are and what we tend to do.
And your forthcoming book, which apologies I have not read yet, but that has an AI angle to it as well, doesn't it?
It does. It does. It's set on a cold eternity. Is set on a ship where this is actually very Star Trek inspired in a way. Where people, the book is set in the future, and it starts actually 150 years before that, where people who had enough money or fame could basically buy into a cryogenic state, kind of like the whole Walt Disney rumors, about his head being frozen and all that stuff. And so you have this ship of wealthy people they're just kind of circling now, right? And part of that advanced technology were AI programming, or AI hosts, who kind of it was just sort of like a Hall of Presidents sort of thing. Really, what inspired this was if you were ever a kid and went to Chuck E. Cheese or Showbiz, remember the animatronics behind the curtain and how creepy it was to look behind the curtain? This was my idea of these hosts, were these people. And then, of course, there's some more malicious or evil intent behind all of this. But really what I was intrigued by that was the idea, and we're getting closer, I think, every day, take that what you will, of AI being indistinguishable from humanity. In other words, when someone's chatting with you in a chat, in a situation like this, are we going to be able to tell a difference at some point? And then also, how do we define humanity if you can't tell a difference? All of that good stuff.
I think your advice about, writing how you picture the future of humanity is really good, because if you do that and you get an impression of what the future could look like, you also get the idea of what powers could be in play and what that would result in, So I think that's really good writing advice for the horror genre. So I will take that on board. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Something
I
that...
think for me... Oh, sorry, go on, Ness. Go.
Oh, sorry. Very quickly, something that I also like to throw in, I love Stacey's approach. And something that I also try to throw in is the fact that, I think a lot of depictions of crazy technology, crazy future advancements can be forgiven if you include what the limitations of that tech are in the setting. Because one thing that we always know is that no matter how fancy, no matter how advanced we get, something that I try to incorporate is the tech always erodes. Like when we sent out the Voyager spacecraft, state of the art at the time, and now, they're starting to break down before they've even really entered what we consider to be interstellar space. Or the James Webb Telescope, which is currently our best facility, our best observing facility, and it already has micrometeoroid scars. Maybe I think we're 3 or so years into operation. So one thing that I like to include is simply yes, this society or the characters we're following, they may have tech that we can't conceive of, or maybe even seems, inconceivable. But as long as there's that, like, how does it fail element, I think readers, I think everyone can kind of buy on in that case.
Nice.
What I was going to say is that just kind of building on that is whenever I map out a story, I always try and think of, especially if you're using technology, what are the problems that you want the character to face? And then that will obviously create some ideas in terms of how they're going to use that technology and what problems they're going to encounter as a result of that, and then what the rules are. So if I know those two things, I know what the problem my character is going to face is. Ultimately, it's going to be this, and I know what I want the rules to look like. Then I can sort of navigate a space where it seems plausible within the foundations of that story. So that's probably my little bit of advice that I would give.
I think also.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Darn it. I'm so bad at this, you guys. I just like the conversation,
No.
so I think I just jump right in. Sorry. Go ahead, Halo.
No. Oh, no, I was just going to say quickly that Julie and I were also lucky in The Inevitability of Evil that the other author who worked with us on it, Ross Young, has a huge background in science and biology. So when he was making all the ships and stuff, he was basing them off of like kind of organic technology and actual scientific facts. So it's nice we just kind of offloaded and we're like, yeah, you do that part.
I was just going to say, I think that as long as you can make it make sense and you have, like Ness was saying, the kind of the decay or the degradation of the technology, and what Chris was saying about the limitations, because that's things like, it's almost like magic in that way. Like if you don't have magic with limitations, you lose that Whitling suspension of disbelief. But as long as you have those things, I feel like you can do anything with technology in sci-fi horror, as long as you have that aspect of it and you're willing to take the time to build into that. Because the truth is, we don't really know. I think about, what is it, Edgar Burroughs, whatever the guy, the John Mars
John Carter
story.
of Mars, yeah.
Thank you. I shelved it the other day and I could not get that out. They thought that people were living on Mars, right? So it's not like in 150 years anybody's gonna be like, oh, that S.A. Barnes, she got it wrong. You know what I mean? Like whatever. So, and if by chance you do something, which this has happened, I was writing this stuff about AI and about the crazy links people will do to preserve themselves for eternal life, and then all of a sudden I start seeing news stories about people who are like, doing blood transfusions and all this stuff. We'll try it. Human beings will try just about anything. And if it happens faster than it did in my story, well, then I just look really smart. So.
Well, that raises a question for me is, when the sort of golden age sci-fi writers were working, they were just inventing whatever came to mind, right? In terms of technology, in terms of, how society is going to be different 100, 200, 2,000 years in the future. And they were writing with a completely different relationship to science and a completely different, level of developed and established science behind them, and also to an audience that had a very different understanding of science. And now we live in a world where it's kind of people want to it's like the cinema sinsification of pop culture, right? Like people want to have those gotcha moments with something they're reading or watching. Do you ever feel that pressure as authors? Do you feel like, oh, I'm going to get an email about this,
This is maybe not the same thing. Oh.
No, Ness, you go ahead.
This is maybe not the same thing, but I have some really, really supportive colleagues. So professors that I've had or other, people in the field who have very, very kindly read my book. And I always feel my shoulders going up like this anytime one of them is like, oh yeah, like I'm reading the book this weekend. I'm like, please, especially if you're in the aerospace side of things, please be kind.
It's kind of funny you mention it, because when I mentioned before about me writing the space horror that I've got planned, the reason that I backed that, the technology, kind of the fear behind that, was I was working with my manager at the time and I kind of gave him some early insights. and he was massively into physics. And he said, well, that wouldn't happen. And that was literally the sparking moment that I kind of just, oh, okay, I don't know what I'm talking about here, and backed off. So yeah, I can relate to that on a much smaller level, but yeah, I can see why you'd feel that pressure passing that on to someone working in the industry.
Have any of you gotten emails, other than, the immediate kind of reaction of, oh, that wouldn't happen? I say emails, I mean, reactions like that.
I don't. Oh, go ahead, Halo.
No. You go. I think we're in sync. That's why. Great minds, right? Go ahead. You go first.
I was just going to say, you know what? People in this case have not told me. I think the worst thing that somebody said was because I write all kinds of, or have written all kinds of genres, and someone told me once that if they had known that I had written YA first before they picked up the book, they would never have read it because, that's obviously, not sufficient enough of a credential for them. But they actually, but I enjoyed it anyway. Well, thank you very much, sir. But I have seen some things where people are questioning, and what's really funny thus far is they're asking about things or questioning things, and I'm like, yeah, I looked that up, a Google search. Now, granted, Google can be wrong. I'm not saying that, but I'm like, no, I really did Google what temperature alcohol freezes at. No, I really did Google how to do this. So, I mean, I'm not saying that I know from experience, but I did at least put the research in, but everyone is very convinced that they know that this is how this works. I'm like, whatever, I'm not going to fight you on it. If you're going to argue about that, you're probably really going to be unhappy with the fact that I don't know how my engines work. So.
Yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of really good sci-fi authors. Like loads of, probably everyone worth their salt has been pulled up on some minor detail at some point by somebody. But I think the fact that they've just had the gusto to go for it and just do it anyway and get the story out there. I reckon 95% of readers are not going to pick up on that small thing, especially if you've done your research and you've tried to make it as authentic as possible. So that would be my advice. Don't think that everyone is going to be in that 95%. It's only going to be a small, minute number of people that are just going to, nitpick. And they're the type of people that will nitpick at anything. Like, so don't worry about that and just go with it. Like, I've had a few emails about various different things in my story. And at the time, it irks you a little bit because you're like, oh, I should have thought about that. But, as a writer, you've got so many things that you're trying to navigate and do, and you're only one person. So until even editors and stuff don't pick everything up. So I would say, just try and have fun with it and enjoy the processing and, get that book out there into the world. And then if little things crop up, if they're massive and you think, oh, do you know what, I'm going to rectify that in the next book. And yeah, just have fun with that. Again, that's what I'm going to do. Some of the things that people have pointed out to me, I'm going to directly reference in the next book and things like that. So, don't take life too seriously. We only get one shot in this massive void, as we've all talked about. So just try and enjoy the process.
Good advice for us all, I think.
I'm
all
surprised
right.
I haven't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Halo.
So sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say, I'm surprised I haven't gotten more emails based off of like my technology. I tend to get angry reviews, kind of, I don't know, almost sci-fi purists that are like, there shouldn't be sex, swears, or anything in sci-fi. So that's where I get me. I'm like, I'm pretty open about how dark my stuff is. So I'm not trying to catch anyone off guard, but I'm like, you could have picked apart so much of my other stuff. But yeah, so that's all I've gotten. Although I'm sure my technology isn't great.
I get that too, because there's always a touch of romance in, because I feel like there's, people get so mad about that, but Aliens, that's the best part, is Ripley and the Marine guy whose name I can't remember, played by Michael Biehn. Like there's just a little bit, because that's part of being human, right? That's an aspect of being human, but man, do I get crap for that. This was such a good book, except for that. And I'm like,
you're talking about Hicks?
Hicks, thank you. Yes, Hicks, the guy from it's the same actor who's Kyle in Terminator.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Kyle Reese. Yes, it's I could remember his real name, but not his character name, which whatever. That's my brain. But yeah, it's really interesting. I'm just what people choose to focus on. But I think also, to an extent, if you're not getting dropped out of it, like whenever, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I read a story about a writer who's working with publishing or is that knocks me out right away, because I'm like, whoop, that's not the way that works. You know, when they were on TV and they're like, oh, I'm going to go on a book tour, and like, nope, that's not how that goes, or whatever it is, that it knocks you out of the reality. But I think you want to be aware of things like that when you're writing sci-fi and horror together, or either whatever combination. But honestly, I really feel like the point is the people and what's happening to the people and the journey that they're on. So if you're really worrying about my engines, then you're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah, there's a strain of hard sci-fi reader who are very resentful of anything other than, like, you know, absolute fidelity to real tech. And my personal view is you just can't write for those people because they're never going to be happy anyway. Sorry to any of you who are watching, but you know. But I did want to go back to the idea of conceiving of a monster or a villain or a threat in space. Obviously, that's going to be different if you're writing something set on a planet, set on a space station, set on, you know, a rocket ship. Where do you start? Where do you start conceiving of what something like that could look like? What kind of powers it could have?
I'm going to just go back to the reference in here, because you've got Aliens, which was the perfect organism. And then you've got Life, which was something found on a speck of dust on Mars, turned into a beast, a monster of some sort. And you've got all these different sort of, going back to Event Horizon was hell in a portal. So you've got all these different avenues. So I think for me, it's all about delving into what I love, what I liked, and then trying to pick apart what I think could happen or be brought into the universe. But then it would be down to how could that come around, so it would be more accurate. Not, like obviously not completely accurate, but yeah, trying to find something that would scare me. But yeah, in terms of finding a monster, it depends what your love for it is. And I think going back to Aliens being the absolute starting point for me, it would probably be something quite terrifying monster-wise.
Mm. For me, when we were planning the inevitability of evil and what the monster or alien was going to be like, what we did was we focused on the essence of humanity, and we were looking at abuse. And again, obviously, I wrote it with Halo, so it is quite dark. But we thought, what does that abuse look like in alien form, and how can it be presented in the most terrifying way? So then things came from that, and that's how the creature developed. Because it was, well, how can this be quite sinister? And if you were being like physically touched, what type of sensation and feeling would you not want in that situation, and what could be the most like invasive? And then this creature sort of developed from there. Ross Young, who wrote the sort of creature's point of view, because it runs through 3 different perspectives, he sort of really delved into that. And again, with his biology head on and stuff, he looked at all that aspect. So the creature comes out and it's totally believable. At no point do you think, oh, this isn't believable, because every single aspect that he's researched has come into the character, and it works for the story. So we kind of did it that way around. We thought, what ideas are we exploring? What themes are we looking at? And then it was the creation of the characters, especially the monstrous alien type characters. And so we started from the themes outwards, I suppose, rather than the opposite way around.
One thing that I really like to play with in regards to this is we talk often about how Earth is really like one of a kind. It's sort of a paradise in kind of a vast, a space of increasingly hostile environments. And so something that I like to do is sort of think about how if we were to encounter someone else in this setting, odds are we probably have had the cushier existence. And whoever we encounter has probably had to fight tooth and nail for survival, again, in these like other hostile environments. Just going by the numbers, like how many Venuses do we see or do we predict to see versus, something as coddling and as luxurious as Earth. And so that's something that I like to play with. I think about if we were to encounter something, they've probably been through a lot worse comparatively. And, how do we, sort of the soft-handed species, like stack up against that?
The answer is probably poorly. Anyone else?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Nope. I was just prompting any more responses, so please go after you.
I probably go about this maybe a little backwards, but I definitely, a lot of what everyone else has said, I look at things that scare me. So, for example, Ghost Station was inspired a lot by what it would feel like to lose your grip on reality. How do you know what's real? And how terrifying that must be when you're trying to make life and death decisions and you can't rely on your own judgment anymore, or even knowing who you are. And some of that's based very much on real life stuff, watching a relative experience dementia and Alzheimer's. I mean, that's just, so I try to, because I feel as a writer, if I'm viscerally affected by whatever is happening, I feel like that comes through on the page. The other thing I'm looking at is, and this is, I think, kind of what Chris was talking about, which is what is this character going through? How are they going to be changed by this? What is the thing that they are going to have to grow to get over to be able to do this, right? So maybe they're struggling with, a sense of impermanence, or they're struggling with, something very basic like a lack of confidence, like whatever it is. And then you have to think about how that's going to interact with whatever your antagonist is, because that has to match, right? Because if it's an issue where, you have somebody who has plenty of confidence and, goes in guns blazing, and then that actually takes care of the creature, you don't have a lot of growth there. You know what I'm trying to say? It has to be, oh no, you don't trust other people, and now we're going to make you work with a team, because this thing can't be defeated with you by yourself. You're a lone gunslinger, and that's great, but too bad this doesn't work for that. So I think some of it is looking at how that character is flawed and how they're going to grow and change, and then shaping the situation, making sure both sides match up.
It kind of reminds me of the Spaceman film with Adam Sandler that came out recently. Have you seen that, anyone? So it's a psychological space horror, but then very weirdly, he's talking to a giant spider on the spaceship.
I read about this.
It's a thing. It definitely is a thing, but that was very much a different kind of. It was more of a psychological space horror, I guess. But then, I don't think personally that was a good move, even though it was very much out there. It just didn't seem to have any sort of effect that was a bit intriguing. It was just a bit weird. So I think there are limitations to what we can use in that sense. But yeah, I think the psychological aspect was what they were going with on that one.
Yeah, right, weird for weird's sake. Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think for me, I tend to lean into like Cooley was saying, like what are we afraid of? And almost I think at the end of the day, we're most afraid of ourselves, like of what potential we have to do bad things in a way. So for like in the mortality experiment, I made secrets sentient. So, and they aren't sentient until you basically go into the void of space and you can't escape, like yourself, So I think for me, I like to go off of that kind of fantastical edge and just see, where can you go? What turns us into monsters, literally, and also like in real life, kind of in a more abstract way.
I did just want to flag for the audience that we will be doing we will be taking some audience questions towards the end here. So if you have any, just drop those in the chat. I'll keep an eye, no rush. So space horror is still a fairly niche subgenre. It's just not a sandbox that a ton of people seem to play in on sort of like long form. It's not that there's none out there. I mean, we have this wonderful panel, but why do you think there's not more of it?
If I jump in first, I think people's mind has to be very vivid and expansive and imaginative to create space horror that isn't kind of already there. because you've got those limitations of the isolation of space, and there isn't much to go on, you really have to think outside the box to be able to create that. So it may be the case that on kind of a lower level that people just aren't creating enough imagination to kind of really come up with something that is unique and specific to create those stories with. I might be wrong on that, but I kind of get that gist.
I think for me, the reason why a lot of people don't entertain it is because it's too real, and because we don't know what's out there, because we are limited in sort of like, obviously we're learning all the time more and more about space, but obviously not so far in the recent future. Like everyone thought that our galaxy, that's it, and now we're suddenly finding out more and more and more, and that can be quite a terrifying prospect for a lot of people in terms of just contemplating reality. Like I often think about when you step outside, if you say, "Oh, just look at the sky," if I do that for long enough, it fills me with a sense of dread that I just can't even contain, because that vastness of space and size and magnitude just becomes overwhelming. And I don't necessarily think I'm alone in that by looking out into that sort of vast space. And I also think as well, it's problematic, especially sci-fi and space horror, with a lot of like religion and things like that, and people's spirituality. And I feel like that can play a part in terms of like, I'm not entertaining in that. Like I don't mind fiction and looking at like, magic and wizards and all that type of stuff, but sci-fi and space horror and aliens and stuff like that, I'm not going there. That doesn't sit with me. And I feel like that's why it's more of a niche field, because it makes you question a lot of your own morals as well, I think, and those fearful questions that you have is, what is the future going to look like, and why are we here, and what's our purpose in this void? So I think it takes a strong mind to tackle it, both as a writer and a reader, and physically comprehend it and be okay with it.
I guess I have I love those answers. I have a more pragmatic, when I wrote Dead Silence, it sold, and I was very excited about it. And then it was a 2-book, I was getting ready to pitch another book, and I had 2 ideas, one of which was another sci-fi horror, another one which was like contemporary set on Earth horror, no sci-fi elements whatsoever. And so I had been told when we were trying to sell Dead Silence that sci-fi horror, it exists, it's a thing, but it can be really hard to sell. People they don't feel like there's a market. So it's interesting then, because I feel like there is a market, and we're slowly proving that. And I think that from the publishing standpoint, they're still working on sort of seeing like what the depths of that, like how far does that go, and how much are we willing to invest in this sort of what someone called a micro genre. And so I think that's one element of it, because if you're looking at it standpoint of, I can write this, or I can write horror that is going to be more immediately recognizable and understandable, you might have a better shot at selling that still. The other part of it too, and this is something that I'm only speaking to my own experience with this, sci-fi and horror are both sort of, how do I want to say this? I mean, they're big genres, they are, but they're kind of their own clubs, right? So you have your sci-fi people who do not want horror in their sci-fi, and you have your horror people who do not want you know what I'm saying? Like they don't. And then you have people who are like, I love horror, but I don't really understand sci-fi. I'm afraid of sci-fi, and vice versa. People, I love sci-fi, but horror is too scary. So it's really, I think it's a hard balance to find, which is also part of it. Is trying to find that audience out there, and trying to write something that doesn't lean too far one direction or the other.
Halo or Ness? Any thoughts?
I mean, I think I love genre mashups, so I realize I'm in like, the minority, but I have definitely noticed that when, like, if you look at my reviews, you can see the people who are more like like they love the sci-fi, but the darkness they're like too much, or the people that love the darkness and they're like, I don't need all the sci-fi stuff. So I think, and I like to like Stacey was saying, I like to include like romance and platonic friendships, and it's all about kind of the people and the effect to me. So I do think it's hard to find the readership that likes all of the pieces, you know, but there definitely are the readers out there that like that too. I think for me, I found the horror community to be a bit more welcoming just because I think they're more like, all right, we're here for the ride. As long as you scare the crap out of us, we're gonna stay. Whereas sci-fi, I think, is a little bit harder. Not everyone by any means, but because you kind of come from that, like the, you know, the Clarks and Asimovs and stuff, you know, people think like that's where the genre is, that's where it needs to stay. So yeah, I definitely find that sweet spot. I think marketing it correctly is always, you know, important, and being open that like, hey, there are all these different elements, and it's kind of this genre salad of, you know, of wonder and darkness helps me the most.
Yeah, I just, not to insert myself here too much, but as a former book marketer, I mean, Stacey, your point about people's genre preconceptions, it is very, very, very real. It's very hard to kind of snap people out of what they expect from a book like this, or a book like, you know, anything genre blending, really. There are always going to be people who say, oh, well, you know, it's too boring if it's not like a total, you know, action-packed gore fest right from page one. And there are going to be, you know, people who say, well, you know, if you give them an action-packed gore fest from page one, there are going to be people who go, oh no, it's too much, it's not realistic, right? Like, everyone dislikes something different, and that kind of goes back to that point of like, you can't write for, you know, you can't write to everyone's taste. It's just not ever gonna work out. All right, now I wanted to kind of switch it up and go for some more fun questions and less, you know, thorny, intricate craft questions. First and foremost, tomorrow you win a contest. The prize is a round-trip ticket to spend a month on the International Space Station. Are you going? Yes or no? Why or why not? Ness, that was a very strong reaction, and I would love to hear from you.
Well, 2 years ago, I was the science speaker at Albuquerque's Bubonicon, which is, I think, my state's longest standing sci-fi fantasy convention. And I gave a presentation on 10 hazards to human survival in space. Obviously, there are way more than 10, but I isolated a couple, I guess, of the most sort of gruesome, you know, ways in which being in the space environment can affect the human constitution. And at least 7 of 10 can all just be found at the ISS way before you start going to interplanetary scales, interstellar scales. So even just leaving the atmosphere already, you're hitting, like, again, like 70% of, you know, the sort of like generic categories of horrible, horrible ways to go. So it's a no for me.
I'm sorry, that's flawless. That's perfect. Please, everyone else.
It's a no for me too, because space is terrifying. And I mean, I think sometimes that's why I write it, because it is terrifying. But also, I have always said, and this is such a petty thing, but I am not going into space until we have regular bathrooms. Like, I'm just not going to do that, which basically means you need gravity generators. And I think we're pretty far from that. So I would be torn, but I think I would say no, because I don't know. But I'm pretty sure I would say for a month. Like, if you said, like, for a couple days, maybe, but for a month, no way. Nope. Mm-mm.
I'm going to go against the grain here and say absolutely yes. I grew up doing silly things and being put in dangerous situations where I was like, oh, let's see what happens. Sounds a bit dodgy, but it wasn't. But I think, why not? I think it'd be an experience and once of a lifetime. So I'd be flying up there.
Mm. I read a thing that astronauts, apparently, when they reflect and see the Earth for the first time, it gives them this sense of, like, responsibility. So I'm going to say yes, and I think it would be a good thing if everyone experienced it, just so we could get a stronger sort of sense of responsibility for the Earth. So that's my more sort of spiritual way of looking at it. I think we should all experience it so we have a deeper sense of responsibility for where we're living and therefore look after it a little bit better. So I would say yes.
I would say definitely yes. Then again, I think like Agate, I've done quite not dodgy things, but I tend to jump first and like look after. But yeah, I've always loved space. I've always loved like I don't know that feeling of weightlessness and like Huli was saying that looking outside of yourself. I do agree with Stacey and Ness's points too. I would love to have bathrooms. Like that would be really nice. And I don't want to go like I think depending on this, I wouldn't go for like 6 months. I think would be too long. But like a month, I think I could do it and then come back and get all the tests that show me how crazy my body has changed. I'll be a guinea pig.
Right. It's funny, Huli, the question of, do you see the Earth from above and feel responsibility for it, or do you have the William Shatner reaction and just start sort of crying like this is awful, we're all so tiny, but that's also the space question writ large. I think there are two types of people. Do you look into the void and see possibility, or do you look into the void and see threat?
Is it wrong to say I look into it and see nothing?
We have found a third type of person, guys.
It's probably a bad answer.
No, it's a good answer. No, there's no bad answers in any of this. This is not a physics test.
They're gonna call you and be like, "We know the next person who are gonna send up this."
Yeah,
they're watching.
Space before the end of the month, I get.
Yeah.
You recognize that once in a lifetime can also have a very negative connotation as well.
Well, it's just nice to change the way of the day, isn't it? Change it up a little bit. Go to space. Have a good time.
Have your coffee with a view.
Yeah.
All right. So, this is a related question. You've got to choose. There's no sitting this one out. You can end up stuck in outer space, safely on a space station. You're not just floating. Or you can be at an undersea research station on the floor of the Mariana Trench. Which one?
Space station, 100%, no question. I don't know why, because I know that you can't breathe in either location, but the claustrophobia of being under the ocean, to me, is way worse than being in a space station. I don't know why, but that's, yeah. I think also because if you're on a space station, logically, hopefully, either you could get off at some point or someone could come get you. Whereas if you're trapped under the water, like if there's a storm or, I don't know, I feel like there's too many more variables, and under the water, I don't know, maybe you die slower. I just think that's worse.
I'm going to agree. I would also pick the space environment for two reasons. One, something I talked about back during the I've already forgotten the name, the submarine tragedy.
The Titan.
Yeah, I also
the submersible. It was
exactly.
Exactly.
I was talking with some people who, for some reason, asked me what I thought the failure point of everything was, and I know nothing about the ocean. But I do know that when you build spacecraft, to make them habitable for humans, really what you have to deal with is a pressure differential of just an atmosphere. Because we're used to, Earth's atmospheric pressure, and we need to build vehicles that can maintain that for us. And when you go to space, which has no atmosphere, really you just have to build one atmosphere. But when you go into the ocean, even to just depths like the Titanic ruins, you're dealing with a pressure differential of something like 400 atmospheres. No. I simply can't put my trust in our tech in a 400 yeah. And then the other element is if you're in space, you have pretty good reassurance that it's just you. But it's not just you in the ocean. Yes, so that's my answer.
Well, that's a good answer. And I was going to say I didn't mind going to either, but after you just explained that, I'll go to space as well, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely in the space category. I've been scuba diving at depths of like 60 plus meters, and that was pretty scary when you actually thought about it. And I've never been space, but I've been in a plane and I felt a lot more comfortable. So just go that little bit higher. I think I'll be all right.
Yeah, I think I'd also rather like freeze to death because I think it just happens a lot quicker than like slowly drowning and being crushed to death by the pressure. So like based on like if you're gonna die, I'd rather go out with like a bang than just yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's that kind of that conceptual difference between being under a lot of stuff or over a lot of stuff, and one is kind of just instinctually more preferable to us.
I have a question for Ness. So when you said that, because this makes me think, and this is totally off, I mean, it's within the range of topics, but it's not related to the question exactly. When you said that about there being other stuff in the ocean, are you at all intrigued, as I am, about all of the UFO, UAP stuff that they've been, like the Tic Tacs they've been seeing that go in and out of the ocean? Like, is there anybody actually on the panel, do you think that there's a combination of our two loves in space, sci-fi and horror in the ocean combining together, because like maybe there's stuff on the water we haven't found?
I mean, that's kind of the brief of Pacific Rim, right? Or the monsters are coming through the Mariana Trench. Yeah, personally, my thought is that if we're going to find anything, you know, like I think we are as equally as likely to find something completely unimaginable to us as a species, you know, on deep in the ocean as we are in outer space. But I say that with absolutely no scientific background whatsoever.
Isn't it? I mean, I'm again not the science person here, but I feel like also there's more ocean on the planet than there is land. Correct? Am I really off by that? No. So like, if you are a you know, a species who wants to watch us from afar, I mean, you know, what better place to hide out than the ocean? Okay, I totally took us off track, but I had to ask
great.
because when you said we're not alone in the ocean, then I was like, ooh, she probably means like giant squid, but I was thinking aliens.
No, that's a very exciting idea. Unfortunately, anytime I hear about craft, like on a terrestrial sense, I feel that it's almost always like human horror. No need to invoke other beings. But being a formerly avid Pac Rim fan myself, I truly love where your mind went there. That's awesome.
All right. If you could take one earthbound horror story, anything, book, movie, TV show, and relocate it to space, what would it be?
I'm going to say The Haunting of Hill House, and have a planet similar to the house that was inherently haunted by some sort of celestial entity that's bound to that planet. I think that's because I love the idea of The Haunting of Hill House as well, and the house being a character within itself, and then the characters within the story discovering the secrets behind it, and that sort of cyclical structure of the beginning and the end. I quite like that idea, so I think I'd like to play around with that in space, I think.
Nice. I think I'm going to go completely sideways here and say Game of Thrones. On the basis that you've got, you know, some sort of humanity or beings on another planet that we've discovered or, you know, moved to, or whatever the case may be. But you've got things like dragons and future kind of myths and beasts that you found on the lands, and you're trying to fight for power. Is, you know, being classically human, that's what happens again. And but you're using all the modern findings as well. That'd be kind of cool.
I'll say World War Z, which the reason I say that is because I think that's such a well-researched and incredibly detailed look at the zombie apocalypse. I love that book. But I had so many unanswered questions about the astronauts on the ISS observing the zombie apocalypse down below. I would just love to see that teased out more.
Nice.
That's one of my favorite. That's one of my favorite books. I recommend that to kids all the time in the library. I'm like, you guys, it's like a documentary of what would happen if this is, that's such a great book. I sort of did my own when I did Dead Silence. I pitched that as the Titanic meets The Shining set in space. So I sort of did that, my version of that with The Shining. But I think it would be really fun because I like horror comedy. But the thing is the thing that's interesting about, space or being on a station or in a ship is you inherently can't escape. So I love one of my favorite campy horror comedies is Happy Death Day. And I just think that would be like, there's nowhere to go. You can't, how do you, so I think that would be that kind of like a fun angle would be fun to play with.
I think I don't know, I have two ideas. Either like paranormal activity on a planet that we don't know of, because I like the whole idea that ghosts are really like almost like physical memories, right? That are like, or like energy memories that are kind of echoed in a location, and where we don't have any context about why is this person here? Why are they haunting? We don't know the background of the planet. I think that could be interesting. Or I think in a more like, I don't know, fun way is like space Vikings, where they're just kind of going around pillaging and plundering. But we are the kind of like society that they're taking over in a way. I think that would be. I realized I just said fun. I'm like, it'd be fun, all this pillaging and plundering, but I think it would be more action focused, I should say.
Well, if it's fictional plundering, then of course.
Yeah, fictional pillaging.
Well, the question was inspired because I was thinking about one of my personal favorite sci-fi novels, which is Hyperion by Dan Simmons, which is basically the Canterbury Tales in space. But actually, Stacey, your answer made me think that now what I really want is It Follows in space.
Oh,
That
you
would
could
be
do that as well really easily.
fantastic. Oh my gosh, I would love that.
Oh, now I'm just going to be distracted thinking of that. But no, back to the panel. All right, we're approaching our endpoint. We've got a few minutes left here. We do have a few audience questions. One of which is, I just of course have to ask this, which is, what is your favorite creature? And I'm going to extend that to, what is your favorite space horror creature? And I'm going to add a caveat, which is you cannot say the xenomorph.
Yeah, I actually thought about this earlier because I saw the question pop up, and I went straight to aliens, but I didn't decide the xenomorph. Surprisingly, I went for the facehugger, and I think because that is one, very relatable in the sense that a lot of people hate spiders, and it's very spider-esque. And secondly, I think this was designed in the 70s, the xenomorph and the facehugger, which is incredible to look back and how amazing it still looks now, something that was made so long ago. But that kind of, it's such a simple kind of specimen that kind of wraps itself around your face, implants obviously the embryo, but the way its tail sort of strangulates you to force you to do that, I think it's so well constructed and thought out. I think it's absolutely like a stunning kind of creation.
I'm going to go sort of in a different... Oh, sorry, Halo. I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
The Reavers from Firefly. And they're not technically a monster, but they're certainly monstrous enough. And that's not even really horror, but man, that one episode actually where there is an episode where they come across the ghost ship. Yeah. And also I just think there's something so terrible about, and I guess in a way it's like the zombie aspect, that they were once human, or some part of them is human, but it's just gone. It's just gone. So I'm going to, Reavers from Firefly.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think for me, I wouldn't say it's so much horror, but the silence from Doctor Who, how like it's making you question what you perceive, and the fact that you're seeing them and you have all the tallies on your arm, right? And then I don't know, that just freaked me out. Also, the Goa'uld from Stargate, the kind of parasites that go and take over. Maybe now that I'm looking back on like the Borg and everything, apparently I have this fear of possession. But anything that makes you like question yourself in any way and like not know who you are, those are always the creatures that scare me.
I would say that Alien versus Predator was very formative for me growing up. And I just thought it was so cool that the majority of the film, you know, you're being hunted by this elite predator. Duh. And then sort of at the end, this is one of my favorite things in stories in general, where your former enemy, you now must team up with against like an even bigger, badder enemy. And so I love how the film like makes you fear and respect the hunter all the way up until the end, when finally you can kind of lean on, you know, like that expertise and be a part of that. I thought it was so cool. And the honorary markings, I was obsessed with that as a child. So definitely Predator for me.
I'm really struggling because as soon as you said space characters, obviously they all just disappear out of my head, and then you get the obvious ones and you think, oh, but anything that can sort of disguise itself as something else, like body snatchers, for example, something like that can take on a different entity and disguise itself, or take control of something else, that would be where I would go with that, I think.
Personally, I have to go back to Hyperion, the Shrike. The Shrike is the not even antagonist, it's just sort of the omnipresent threat in Hyperion, and it's basically a giant alien covered in spikes, and it impales you on a tree of thorns, much like the actual bird, the terrestrial bird the Shrike does to its tiny little prey animals. Read Hyperion, everyone. Read Hyperion. Don't read any of the other books in the series. Just read the first one. It's literally perfect. But building off that, for our last question, I would love to have each of you tell us your favorite space horror movie that is not in the Alien franchise, and your favorite space horror book that is not by someone on this panel.
Let me start with a movie, because I know a lot of people's brains are suddenly going, oh my god. So for me, space horror, and I think it's so massively underrated, this movie, Event Horizon, it was way before its time. And I think if that was to come out now, in how much people are really loving horror movies at the moment, I think it would be so well talked about. And it's just such a great film. And if you haven't seen it, obviously, you know, you're dealing with an abandoned, lost spaceship that's traveled back from somewhere carrying something very dark. And I think it's a very simple kind of story that is just done so well with an amazing cast. And really, it's, you know, you're playing against sort of the darker evils that we think are on Earth as well. So it's, you know, I think it's a fantastic movie.
I am totally seconding Event Horizon. Love Event Horizon. I also will add, I didn't know about this movie until I had written Dead Silence, and somebody was like, oh, did you, you know, you were inspired by this Pandorum? And I was like, nope, never seen it, but Pandorum is fantastic. That's a great movie as well. Those are my two favorites outside the Alien franchise. And as far as horror, space horror books, not written by anybody on the panel, I love, and I always screw this up, but her book is Dead Space, Callie Wallace. And it's just so, I'm not even sure if it's quite horror, but it is horror-esque. And it has a mystery. I just loved it. And then the other one, I think, is Salvaged by Madeline Rue. Those are both fantastic books.
I would say I have two movies. One is Doom, which I understand is not critically well received and a departure, too far of a departure in many people's minds from the source. But I say that movie is quite literally the reason why I am where I am today, getting my PhD in astro. And then the other one is Pitch Black. Pitch Black is so fun. It's so good. I love it so much. Vin Diesel was born to play that role. It's so good. And then as far as books go, it's hard to choose a favorite, but I have been recommending Paradise 1 by David Wellington recently, because I thought that the bad guy, the antagonist of the book, was something that I hadn't seen before. And I really appreciated that fresh breath, fresh take on it.
I'm going to say a book that I know it's not really in the horror genre, but it kind of is if you're thinking about the whole thing, which was The Martian, Andy Weir. For me, that was a real kind of intricate, detailed story about space and being stuck and trapped. And the lengths of the research in that novel kind of blew my mind. So for me, I'll go with that one.
I'm gonna have to say also Pitch Black, like that Chronicles of Riddick. Just yeah, I love that, and I thought it was so. I don't know, they did the world building in that. You know, it's a lot of fun, but I feel like they really put effort in. For a book I read pretty recently, Thrum by Meg Smitherman. It kind of deals with that. What is real? Who is who can you trust? You know, I don't want to give anything away because I think if you go in not knowing anything, it works well. But there's kind of a spaceship and a crash, and there are a lot of like elements of lost time. So it's got this fugue-like state, and you're like, I don't know who to trust or what's going on. And then the ending was a great twist that I just totally didn't see coming.
All right. Sorry, can you guys hear me? Okay,
Yep.
great. Sorry. My sound just dropped out for a second. I do also want to make a plug for a book that came out 6 or so years ago called The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling. Huge fan of that one. It's basically a cave diving horror novel on a very hostile alien planet. Incredibly fun, very, very effective. And yeah, I mean, in terms of a movie, I have to, it's a third for Event Horizon. I'm always chasing that high when I'm seeking out space horror.
Could you just let me know the name of that book again, please? Because I need to find that one.
Yes, The Luminous Dead.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, guys, this has been such a lovely conversation. Thank you so much. We've just got a minute or two left here, and we're going to start wrapping up. But I did want to give you all one more chance to just tell us where to find you online and also what your next or most recent book is so that all of our viewers have that information handy. So let's start with Chris Hooley.
Yeah, so you can find me over on the Writing Community Chat Show on YouTube. It's a show where we interview authors from all genres about their work and their books, and we're on there on a weekly basis, and all the socials are covered on the Writing Community Chat Show. So just type us in anywhere. We're even on TikTok, which is rare for middle-aged men to be on TikTok. We don't dance or anything, I promise. But yeah, so yeah, not enjoying that yet. So yeah, that's sort of my go-to. I kind of need to improve the author game, to be honest, in terms of individual sort of platforms and stuff. But I kind of like just sitting at my desk and not doing that side of things. Yeah, there is that. Obviously, The Inevitability of Evil, which we talked about today, which I wrote with Ross Young and Halo Scot. Check that out. The next book that I've actually got coming out will be a second book to my Death to Grin and Bear It series, which is not a space horror. It's more urban life, dread and misery. Oh, and I have a child. So yeah, find those things. I'll mute the mic.
I love the way you said, "Oh, I have a child," like you just grew one. Yeah. I'll jump in there quickly as well, just because it's linking in. Writing Community Chat Show, also very much the same. Me and Chris host that show. My latest book came out very recently. It's only an ebook at the moment. It's a novella about 11 authors stuck in a 19th century German castle. Things start going terribly wrong, and no one makes it out alive. Spoiler, but not really. It's very gruesome. Go and check that out. But also, thank you very much, Emily, for letting us be on this panel.
All right, Halo, you're next.
Yeah, I want to say thank you so much, Emily, and everyone here. It's been a really, really fun. All of my information is on my website, haloscot.com. The Inevitability of Evil is free. Also, it's permanently free. So if anyone wants to try something out, that's space horror. As for next steps, I'm kind of I'm not sure yet. I'm kind of seeing where the wind blows. But I do have a serial novella going out on my Substack, a chapter a week on Bloodthirsty Thursdays. So yeah, if you that's about it's more kind of historical fiction, demonic unicorn stuff. So if you're into darkness, then that's there. Edge of the Breach is also permanently free now. So if that's more of it's space, horror, romance, fantasy, thriller. I just basically added everything into it. So yeah, but thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, Stacy.
Thank you again to everyone. You guys, this was so much fun. I wish we could do things like this more often. It was just a lot of fun to hear all the different perspectives, and I love it. So thank you for having me. In terms of my socials, I'm confusing because I'm out there under my other pen name, which is Stacey Cade, Kade. And I'm on most often on Instagram, but I'm trying to make inroads on Blue Sky as well. And I'm author Stacey Cade under like all of that. And of course I have a website too, which is stacycade.com, but it has all my essay barn stuff on it as well. I have Ghost Station, which was my release, I think in 2024, will be out in paperback next month. And then I have a new book called Cold Eternity coming out April 8th, 2025 that I am super excited about. Thank you again for having me, you guys, and I hope we'll all stay in touch.
And Ness.
Yeah, just echoing everyone else's sentiments. This was amazing. I'm going to shamelessly take some of the insights that you guys shared into my next project. So definitely thank you for moderating, Emily, and thank you to TBRCon for letting me participate. As far as socials go, I'm at ness-brown.com, and on all media, it's basically Ness, the novelist. And my next book, my next project, will be my fantasy debut. It is a book about what happens when an ambitious apprentice astrologer accidentally unleashes an ancient demon onto his small town, and everything that happens after that.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much, and thank you to everyone who took time out of their Sunday morning, early afternoon to watch. And have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.